And now, Madam Chair and members of the board, for the second motion action item, Mr. Earl Hinton, Athletics Director, presented information relative to a recommendation coming forward from the Division of Intercollegiate Athletics to accept an invitation to join the Colonial Athletic Conference. I will now ask Mr. Hinton to present additional information related to this recommendation. Mr. Hinton.
Thank you, Trustee Buford. I appreciate your time this afternoon and look forward to spending a few minutes discussing the recommendation to accept membership in the Colonial Athletic Association for the Department of Intercollegiate Athletics here at A&T. Let me make sure that I have the ability to share my screen. Kevin, would you make it possible for me to share my screen, please? Excellent. As Trustee Buford mentioned, we made a presentation yesterday to the Executive Committee regarding an invitation we received from the Colonial Athletic Association regarding potential membership in that conference. I am going to attempt to condense that presentation and give the pertinent details in an efficient manner. That's contrary to my nature. I'd like to get into the weeds normally. I'm going to fight that urge, but I do want to make the trustees aware that a copy of the full presentation deck that was shared yesterday with the Executive Committee is on the SharePoint site in the Executive Committee section and also in the Board of Trustees section for the full board meeting, and invite you to review that and look at it and share any questions which you may have with me as a result of your review of that material. We're going to try to run through quickly the context of this proposal and why we decided to look at it, the proposal itself, how it was evaluated. We'll summarize the data that was developed during the assessment. Beg your pardon? Hello? Okay. And then we'll talk about the recommendation that Trustee Buford mentioned that I made yesterday. In November of 2021, last November, we received an invitation from the Colonial Athletic Association to consider membership in their athletics conference. This was not an invitation that we had solicited nor anticipated at this point in our strategic direction. Based on the state of the NCAA today and some of the challenges facing the Big South Conference right now from a football scheduling perspective, we made the decision to evaluate, to assess that invitation specifically, looking at data and make a decision that was in the best interest of our student athletes and A&T athletics moving forward. The NCAA is in a state of transition right now. In the last 8 months, a number of things have happened which have created some churn in the NCAA, what's been a relatively stable organization for the last 50 years. Begins with the NIL decision, or the Alston decision, which eliminated the antitrust protection that the NCAA had enjoyed for educational benefits and gave a clear signal that many of the other restrictions that the NCAA had in place on compensation for student athletes were also suspect. That happened in June of last year. The NCAA went through a series of decisions and changes culminating in a constitutional convention in November of last year, which led to the adoption of a new constitution in January of this year. We won't go into all the details of what that might mean, but what is clear from the new constitution is the Division I administration and governance and revenue sharing is going to change significantly between now and August of 22. The divisional structures will be different based on the needs of all the Division I institutions, and they vary widely across budgetary constraints and expectations. And the role that a conference will play in the administration and governance of institutions will be significantly enhanced as compared to previous governance structures that were in place with the NCAA. conference membership will be more important moving forward than it has been in the past. Now, the Big South, I mentioned the football challenges through no fault of their own. The Big South lost 4 football playing membership schools between the end of football season in 21 and January of 22. They have gone to different conferences, which has exposed the Big South Conference to some instability in their football scheduling. They no longer have the current or the minimum number of football playing institutions to maintain their automatic qualifier status with the NCAA. I am confident that the Big South will solve that problem. They'll be able to identify schools that will shore up the instability in football, but that exists today and certainly gave renewed emphasis to our decision to evaluate this proposal from the Colonial Athletic Association. The proposal from the Colonial essentially is to divide into regions. When we begin our assessment of athletics conferences in 2015, the evaluator, the assessor, the company that we hired to look at our posture came back and said the Colonial Athletic Association is your target conference. Based on your academic aspirations and your athletic aspirations, that's where you need to go. At that point, the Colonial Athletic Association was a Northeast conference, and the travel made that prohibitive, and it was not an option we explored. The Colonial has decided, based on their experiences, that they need to divide into divisions. They're creating a North and a South division, which answers the concerns that we had about the travel and the distance and the school missed by our student athletes. So that's the proposal. Membership perspective, this is who's currently in the Colonial Athletic Association conference, or will be as of July 1, 2022. This is the divisional structure as proposed by the Colonial Athletics Association. We would obviously be a member of the Southern Division. For football playing institutions, I have the FB next to those names. From a football perspective, Richmond would also be in the Southern Division, and Towson would be in the Southern Division from a football playing perspective only. So that is their proposal. Taking that proposal, we assessed the merits of that proposal and compared our current conference affiliation with the Colonial Athletics Association. We looked at academic and athletics profile, expenditure, stability, population centers, and media markets. We reviewed the data that we collected between 2015 and 2020 in our initial assessment of conference affiliation. We reviewed the data that's available on the NCAA website that allows us to compare across a number of variables, compare conferences and institutions across a significant number of variables. We also reviewed publicly available data relates to academic or athletics performance, RPI, net ratings, Learfield Cup standings, Capital One Cup standings, Sagarin ratings that assess how individual institutions and conferences perform against each other. We looked at Carnegie classification information, U.S. News and World Report rankings of best colleges, enrollment and admission and selectivity rates for those institutions and conferences. We then took all that data and presented it to groups of athletics administrators here on campus, representatives from the Hall of Fame, from the Aggie Athletics Foundation, from the Alumni Relations organizations, and our student athlete leadership teams. We've got a student athlete advisory committee, and we shared this data with those groups and organizations and sought their feedback. How does this feel? What does it look like? What are your thoughts and impressions? Having completed that, if I can find my little cursor again to advance this forward, the findings that came out of those reviews. The Colonial Athletic Association has exceptional academic performance in acceptance rates and entering test scores, SAT test scores for their freshmen. Half of the Colonial Athletic Association institutions are R1 or R2 research universities. We're in R2, and our aspiration, our expectation is to be an R1 by 2030. Half of the schools in the Colonial are already R1 or are currently R2. The U.S. News and World Report rankings of the universities significantly higher more of them ranked and ranked higher. And finally, from an athletics perspective, on average, they perform higher in the Learfield Cup and the Capital One standings and on net rankings from an assessment of their department in total and men's and women's sports, performing at a higher level than we currently are at this point. We looked at the budgets and the money, because that's clearly part of this conversation, part of the decision that we have to factor into our calculus. They spend more on certain categories, scholarships being one, more from a dollar value, not more from an equivalency value. And I can explain that later if we need to. They also spend more on facilities and salaries. They have more teams than we do. They have more coaches than we do. We'll have to get into that game. We match up well across other variables: support, student body size, institutional expenditures, travel expenditures and mileage, market size. And the Colonial is considerably bigger than what we have right now, just in terms of number of households that are inside the footprint of the conference geography. So my recommendation that I made last night and that I make again today is that we accept the invitation from the Colonial Athletic Association to begin competing in all sports except football and bowling, effective July 1 of this year, and for football, July 1 of 2023. You can guess my rationale here. The academic profile is consistent with our institutional aspirations, our current aspirations and status as an R2, and our aspirations to become an R1. The athletics reputation and performance of those institutions is where we aspire to be. You can't get any higher in FCS conference than the Colonial from a competition perspective. The travel commitments that would be available to us or required of us because of the divisional nature of the proposal are comparable to where we are now. The stability of having 13 or 14 football playing institutions in the conference is attractive to us. The media market, as we discussed earlier, is significant and drawing from regions where we have current and prospective students and student athletes we hope to attract to A&T. The landscape in Division I athletics, as I mentioned briefly at the beginning of the presentation, is changing rapidly. And I can't tell you what it will look like in August, but I can tell you that it's going to be different, and the revenue sharing opportunities and the access to championship opportunities will be different then than they are now. And our association in conferences will have bearing on what opportunities are available to us. Finally, I think we are uniquely positioned today with our brand and reputation and the things that we have accomplished in the last 10 years to put us in a position to receive this invitation and then to act on it in a way that will move the Department of Athletics and the institution forward exponentially. That is my presentation and recommendation, Mr. Bluford and Madam Chair.
All right, thank you, Mr. Hilton. And Madam Chair, having heard Mr. Hilton's report, may I have a motion to approve the athletic conference recommendation?
Trustee Bluford, if it's coming from the committee and the committee has approved it, it can go right in and we can go to the vote. Is it coming from the committee?
Yes, the executive committee did approve and pass it last night.
Outstanding. So excellent report, Mr. Hilton. We have a motion coming from the executive committee to move into the Colonial Athletic Association as depicted by the years. I will now ask Ms. Wright to do a roll call.
John Bluford,
Yes.
Calvin Brody,
Yay.
Mark Copeland,
Yes.
William Dedley,
Yes.
Kim Gatling,
Yes.
Vanessa Harrison,
Yes.
Paul Jones,
Yes.
Verdant Julius,
Yes.
Timothy King,
Yes.
Joe Parker,
Yes.
Hilda Penix Ragland,
Yes.
Askar Vinapali,
Yes.
Lynn Wooten.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. The motion passes. Thanks again, Trustee Bluford, for presiding and an excellent report. Everyone, those were excellent reports. Those from the university who have put a lot of effort into putting them together and delivering them to the various committees, and also to each one of the board members for your active engagement. You probably noted I am a little stickler sometimes on parliamentary procedures, and so no motion is required, no second is required when the motion comes from a committee. And it's one of those things we'll continue to work on. What a historical week for A&T. Boy, Chancellor, it will never be the same. You are our first Aggie Chancellor that actually has a name at the far corner, right there at Dudley, and oh my gosh, and that market or gateway. I am just so excited to see that Harold Lee Martin Sr. Engineering Research and Innovation Center, the complex. Congratulations again.
Thank
You had a vision when you came. You didn't take no for an answer. You were relentless. And if I heard pursuit of excellence, years ago, you would say it, and I'm thinking, okay, but you kept delivering. This is truly what a visionary leader does. And based on what we saw today, it's not going to stop. So trustees, members of his cabinet and team, we are in for a great ride. Thank you, Chancellor, for everything you've done.